everyone. Today I have with me Margaret George, and this is her newest book, The Confessions of Young Nero. And I am so honored to be able to talk to you today, Margaret. I've been researching and studying for this interview for a couple of weeks now, so I'm so happy to finally meet you.
Well, thank you. No, I'm excited to be able to talk about it with you. So let's go ahead.
Well, when I first found your book I think I saw you on Facebook. Are you on Facebook?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I have it all
and then
staged.
I went to Amazon, and a lot of the interviews that I do, I'll either invite them after I read the book or before. Well, yours was a before because I saw it and I was like, you know what? That's one part of history I am not that good at. I really want to read this and get to, because, you know, current history, 17, 18, a lot of people are way more versed in that kind of, history knowledge. But you take on subjects that not a lot of people, so you did Nero. For everybody here, I'm going to read you the books that you have written, okay? Elizabeth I, Helen of Troy, Mary called Magdalene, the Memoirs of Cleopatra, Mary Queen of Scotland and the Isles, and then the autobiography of Henry VIII. Every single one of those, I have a little bit of a knowledge, but I started to do way more, YouTube is my friend because I start watching a lot of YouTube videos but really on Nero, I found two documentaries on Nero. So I was like, how did you, I want everybody to see this book, okay? This is a book, and it's amazing, and you are such a great storyteller. I love the way you told his story. But how did you find all the research on him that you found?
Well, first of all, let me just say about Henry VIII, it happens that today is its 31st anniversary. It was published 31 years ago today. That book, yes.
Wow. Nice.
September 15th, 1986. And so, it's amazing that people are still reading it. It's still in print and everything. But about Nero, there are only three surviving histories of him, and they're pretty spotty. They don't have all that much in them. They make us hungry for more details. But I was lucky that I had one of them that is for most of his life, but it conks out in the last 2 years of his life. So. But there's a lot written about him, but there's a lot of misinformation about him because these three sources were very hostile to him because they were written after his death and written in a different administration. And you know what a different administration is like. A different administration does not have much to say good about the previous administration. So and it's the same today. It's the same 2,000 years ago. So, the three historians writing about him were really very much wanted to please the people that had replaced him, and especially as he was replaced by a completely different dynasty.
Right.
So they ascribe all these motives to him that they couldn't possibly know whether he really thought that or not. So it was kind of fun to write a revisionist biography, and modern historians have done some revisionist studies on him, in which they examine what really happened and use modern techniques to try to tease out the facts, which is also what happened with Mary Magdalene. People have to really go into the sources and try to figure out what was going on behind the scenes when it was written. So, I had a lot of help that way because it's lucky that modern historians have been really taking a close look at it. And then I was also lucky that for some reason there have been two major Nero exhibits, one in Rome in 2011. And then there was one in, of all things, Trier, Germany. I'm going to show you this big Nero poster.
Nice.
It was in Trier, Germany, October of 2016. And it was huge. It had like 400,000 articles and exhibits, big catalogs. And that was really helpful in getting to know him. There were something about the objects that somebody has touched and has with them, and the kind of things that they treasure. So yeah, it was a kind of a treasure hunt to find out more about him.
Yeah, because when I watched the documentaries after I was listening to your book and reading your book at the same time, so that when I'd go out to get coffee, I could listen. and then when I get home, I can go back to reading. I kind of did it back and forth, chapter for chapter, because it is such a big book. But I wanted to make sure that I got through it all, you know. And first of all, whoever did your audiobook did an amazing job.
That's great. That's great.
They did to keep the interest. And that's not an easy thing sometimes, you know. Sometimes you kind of get lost in the details with those audiobooks. But no, I was able to switch back and forth very easily. And a lot of people are listening to audiobooks now. So for everybody out there that prefers an audiobook instead of sitting down and reading this.
Well, I got to choose the narrators. I asked if I could do that because, you know, it really makes a difference if the narrator does not sound like the character. Yes. It really kind of ruins the book, or it doesn't sound like it ought to. So
right, right. So when you watch, so I watched the documentaries, and I felt so smart because I was like, I remember that part. I remember that part. But the difference between your book and the documentaries are that because of your book, I saw a different side of Nero.
Yeah.
The documentaries had him listed under like top 10 evil people.
You know? You know, and Nicholas Kristof had a column in the New York Times in the 27th of August in which he, you know, said mean things about Nero. It wasn't primarily about Nero. He mainly attacked Caligula. But I wrote a letter defending Nero, and it got published because I said, this is not true, this is not true, this is not true. And they wanted documentary, you know, supporting links and evidence before they would print this because they didn't want that just a crackpot. But anyway, you know, I could have a full-time job defending his honor, I think. But it's in the September 2nd letter column. So I was very pleased. I feel like that, you know, sooner or later, maybe the truth about Nero will get more widely known.
Well, okay, so what made you decide to take on his case? Because really, when I was reading this, I mean, you take on just for everybody that, you know, is thinking about reading this, is that you take on a first person take on him. And so you're like picking Nero's brain. You are like feeling things but I mean, it was really good because I think that was definitely a way to experience him instead of saying about him. You know, instead of making it, and of course you did correct me, like, you're not a historian, you're a historical fiction writer, and so your story, you can kind of take those facts, and then, you know, try to take on how he was feeling during these different times in his life.
Yeah, being a writer, you're much more elastic because a historian has to give you all the different possibilities, like maybe he did this, maybe he did that. On the other hand, maybe he did that. If you're a novelist, you have to decide. But I like the first person because it's, well, now there's kind of a trend that you're supposed to tell the story from someone else's point of view. But I think that we all know what they did. Right. And we want to know why they did it. Right. We don't need, if you just have another person describing them, then you again don't really know why they did it. You only know what the other person's describing, so it's very third person. And I just think that, you know, we want to know the motivations, we want to know the emotions, we don't want someone else describing it. But to do a first person, you have to kind of do a self-hypnosis. You have to turn into that person as much as you can. I'm wondering what Nero would think if he knew a 21st century woman was trying to be him. I mean, would he be flattered, or what would he think? I don't know. But anyway, I think I've done a good job in exposing what I believe is the good side of him, the misunderstood side of him. So I guess he would like that.
Yeah, and so back to like when you decided to write about Nero, because as I'm looking at your list of people, he's got to be because we have Mary Magdalene, but
Helen of Troy was the earliest, but she's mythological, really. I mean, you know, we don't know that she ever really lived, and so that's a whole different category.
Right. And then Mary Magdalene, that's a whole other kind of research because you're going, you know, from biblical research and everything you can find. But Nero, like, what made you, think, you know what, I could do this. I could write about Nero.
Well, I had spent some time in the Roman Empire with Cleopatra because, you know, she was a lover of both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. And I got very interested in this, you know, this family of the descendants of Augustus. And yet I think Nero is the most interesting of them. I mean, Augustus is interesting. But Tiberius and well, Caligula, he's really kinky, but no, not many redeeming features. Claudius, but you get to Nero and you get a very complex character because I think of him as the person. I think he really was truly an artist, and that's how he thought of himself. That's how he wanted to be. But so many people have been killed to make him emperor. Yeah. And it's kind of like, I always thought it was like, how many people do you know that want to be an artist? They want to be a writer, they want to be a painter, they want to be an actor, but their family says, no, you got to go to law school.
Right.
And that's kind of what happened to him. It was like, so in our modern day, the person can go off and try to be an artist or a film actor or something, and then if it doesn't work out after 5 years, he can go to law school, I guess. But if you're the emperor and you're only 16, you became emperor when he was only 16. And you can't just step away. I mean, you can't do what Pope Benedict did, which is, I think I'll retire. Right. There was only one retirement, and that was, into the grave. So once you're
That's
on
only one retirement.
You don't want that kind of retirement. And I just thought about this poor conflicted person. And, he probably did have a lot of talent, although people now, say, oh, he couldn't have been any good because he was the emperor. But that's not true. I mean, that's like saying Jane Fonda couldn't be an actress and be any good because her father, right. Peter Fonda, I mean, was a great actor, not Peter, that's your brother. And the fact that someone has a certain position doesn't mean that they're not any good in the arts. So, but I just felt so bad for him because, he had all this power, but he didn't have the power to be free. And at the end of his life, and I have a second book, I just finished the second part, he really kind of cut loose and grew his hair out and wore flowered caftans and all kinds of stuff. And that's really why he fell from power, because he finally cut loose and wanted to just sort of basically stop being the emperor and say, well, I can do what I please. And of course, that was really just deadly because he couldn't. He really couldn't. But he finally answered that side of himself almost completely. He went off to Greece on a 16-month artistic tour, the first mass market pop star. Right. So, so you really get that he finally, fulfilled his desire. But it meant that, again, he paid the price because he died. He was only 30 years old.
I know. I couldn't believe that.
No,
I mean, not that they lived like that old then, but I really, like, in that short amount of time, the transition that I had to make. And let me just tell you, I'm a homeschooling mom. Okay. Yeah. And one year when I have 6 children, and one year I decide we're going to go back to ancient Rome, and I tried to put together some kind of chronology. Right. And, and I couldn't do it. I was really like, it was before the internet really that I could go on and try to figure it out. But I just want to show people because I was so happy to see this in your book. But there it is.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
There's the chronology, but now I know why I couldn't do it because the aunts and the uncles and the names and you had to really. I did not know enough. Really, I mean, now I look back and I think, oh, I just did not know enough. But you can understand why it was so difficult, even for you to do that kind of. Because the names kept changing, and then they were like younger and older, and with the same name. So I'm really happy that you did that because it made sense to me as I was reading. I would constantly refer back to that, to figure out who was who. And
you have to know that, and it's also more complicated because the women just had the names of their fathers with an A on the end. So if you were Mark Antony's daughter, you have they're all named Antonia. So you can't even tell them apart that way, and that was confusing. So I'm glad that was helpful. I actually tried to make it as simple as possible and excluded some of the siblings that didn't count, but it's still complicated.
It still is complicated. And also like the Claudius and Claudia and younger, like that, the way they did that. But, anyway, so when I'm reading this, I'm kind of thinking how you brought him into a modern day way of thinking because let's take his history, and then you say, like, he was 16. But what happened to him before he was 16? It was child abuse, okay? This little boy, what he went through until he was 16, in modern day, we would be like, well, no wonder he needs help. This poor boy was left alone and adopted by a woman who he was scared of, and should have been scared of.
I used to say that, now Child Protective Services would take him away, and also that it's a wonder he grew up to be as normal as he did, because he had a lot of psychological shocks, and I think it's another reason he retreated into art, because art was safe, and art was the thing that was him, and that nobody could get in there and ruin it for him.
Right, and he kind of went away. I mean, for everybody, because I know nobody knows as much as we now know about Nero, and because of reading your book, but like his mother and father died before what? How old was he by the time?
No, wait a minute. No. His mother was in exile. His father died when he was about 2.5. His mother went into exile because of all these political things. Okay. And then when she came back, she was really talk about mommy dearest. She was really...
Right. Yes, that's right. I remember that part. See, I told you, I'm like, it's so difficult to know all this stuff.
She was really, the power behind the throne. And she really thought that she would be able to rule through him. She was very ambitious because she was the mother of one emperor, the sister of another, she was Caligula's sister, and the wife of another, which was Claudius. So she really felt that, she should be running the empire.
Right.
And it was this
Agrippina, right?
What a teenage, yes, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina the Younger, because Agrippina the Elder was the mother of all this.
Okay, this stands to why I was so confused, because I was like, okay, so good, I'm glad you're straightening this up for me.
But, some of their dynamics you can understand really well just from today. Because, okay, what does a teenage boy want to do? He does not want to listen to his mother. So when he became emperor, and he's now the emperor, right, but he's also a teenager. And she starts trying to boss him around and tell him what to do as usual. And suddenly, your son that you've made the emperor is the emperor. And he doesn't have to listen to you anymore. And, you get all these dynamics like that are very modern and very normal, really. So I enjoyed that part because it made him very human, too. It made me able to understand him. And I think, anybody else would be in the same position, they do behave that way today.
Yeah, and I really think that now that I'm, this is the problem with watching the documentaries. I think I actually got that info, and I think it's wrong. I think they were wrong, about Agrippina. So I think that, because now that you say it, I'm like, that's right. I remember that in the book, but I think the documentaries kind of, because they wanted to paint such a bad picture of him.
Yeah.
That I think that's where I got that from. So I'm really glad that your book really takes it back and makes you understand him, because he did have a time before he became emperor. Didn't he he went away and studied arts and sports?
He was kind of on his own when he was young, and a little boy, and he was free to do all those things. They're actually in the book, I do describe that sculpture where she's putting a crown on his head. Yes. He's a sulky, that exists. That's an aphrodisiac, and you'll see it in a lot of art books. And he's very sulky, and she was wearing a little military uniform that she made him wear. And in it, she's taller than he is, and she's sort of dressed like a goddess, and she's putting this crown on his head. Let's show him who's boss. But he was the emperor, and you think you create this person, you think they're going to be a puppet, and they turn out not to be.
Right. Now, do you believe that their relationship, that Agrippina's relationship with him, besides being very abusive, was there anything sexual about it?
Well, that's an interesting question. So as a novelist, they said that there were rumors about it. The three historians that we have, and the nearest one actually is about 50 or 60 years after, they said, so one historian, first of all, they said there's a lot of rumors about it.
Right.
And then one historian said, well, she wanted to incest with him to control him. And the other one said, no, it was his idea. And the other one says, nobody knows. So as a novelist, because I don't like to go against, if there's something rumored or talked about, I had an explanation for it. Right. But it wasn't like it was really his idea. Right. But I figured that people know about this, that ask about it just as you did. You have to have some explanation or example of it, because you can't just. One thing about rehabilitating a person has a bad reputation is you can't whitewash them.
Right.
You can't say, "Oh, this never happened," or "I just won't talk about it." You have to talk about it. Right. You have to maybe have an explanation or have a scene with it, but you can't just ignore it. I remember when I was doing Henry VIII. I mean, the executions got kind of tedious. And I said to my editor, "Do we have to do this over and over?" And she said, "Yeah, you got to have them all in there, else people will say you're whitewashing him." But she said, "You don't have to have all the details. All you have to do is say, and he met the usual felon's death." And I think she's right. You've got to have them in there.
Yeah.
So that the scene is in there.
Yeah.
As you know.
Yes. Yeah, and I was, because as a historical fiction, it's like you do try to answer some of the questions that people are going to have, and it's like, when I was reading it, I was like, okay, I don't think that elaborate. I think you took something that was said, or
Yeah, it was said. It was said.
It was said about him.
And they did have the gossip about the litter. That you could tell there'd be something going on inside the litter because their clothes were all messed up when they got out. And he says, I have a whole palace. Why would I do something to litter in public? And so some of the gossip obviously doesn't make sense, but gossip starts, and you gotta explain it somehow. So
right.
Not ignore it.
Before we start talking about your writing, because I do want to talk about your writing, but the other thing that's known about him is, his wife that was pregnant with their second child, the first child had died, and supposedly he'd kicked her. Or, how do you feel about that whole? Was there a lot written about that, or when you were dealing with it?
Yeah, that's interesting because there's another one which people know about and
and judge him on.
They say. What?
And judge him on.
And judge him, yes. I don't think it's true as portrayed, because, first of all, and modern historians say that too. They say, well, one modern historian even says he was so melodramatic that even if she died of these natural causes, or maybe wasn't even pregnant at all, he liked to dramatize himself and act characters from plays in which he would take this part, and he was like Hercules, and he had injured his wife and his children, and he had to do penance, and so you don't know how much of it is just that she died of normal circumstances, and because one of the sources says she had been ill, and how much of it is true. But we do know that the thing about his kicking her because she scolded him. He was not a physical kind of person. He never. There's no record that he ever struck anybody, and he was crazy about her. So I think the whole thing about his kicking her to death, this is portrayed in one of those miniseries, is not true. However, she was prone to. She'd had one child that died. Perhaps there was an accident and he fell on her, and so I believe that if he injured her in any way, it was an accident. Because it's just not in character. You'd have to say you'd have to have had other instances of this person attacking people physically, and he didn't. He was just not that kind of person. So I think that we'll never really know.
Right.
I think all the way all the way to the historian saying, well, maybe he made it all up so he could act out these parts on stage. That's a little far-fetched, I think, but he was getting more and more into all the drama. Right. But you don't know that he loved her very much. He missed her very much, and one of his last recorded things is he finally dedicated that shrine to her that he had ordered. It took him a couple of years to build it, and he dedicated that. So
so that wouldn't make much sense actually, because why would you do that?
And he really wanted an heir. He was very down about not having an heir because their daughter had died after only 4 or 5 months, and now they're expecting another one. And the idea that he would jump on her and kick her doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't really line up. Okay, so to your writing, because I am fascinated by your by your writing style, because with historical fiction, you know what the ending is. So you've got to make the writing so good and so interesting that people are like, okay, I think I know about Nero, so what do I need to read this for? Well, you need to read it because it's a really good book. And yes, it's long and you cover a lot, but you're also covering the history of. I mean, it's not just about Nero. You're covering a lot of ancient Roman history and making it really readable. And that's not an easy task. Okay. I've read a lot of history books that are not that easy to read. So I loved your book. And I saw Henry VIII, wasn't that like 900 pages?
Yeah, that was really long.
That's a really long.
So, beginner then.
Right. So, we're not talking like
then too.
Yeah. The research that you're putting in, the writing that you're putting into these books is not, not like I'm going to write this in 3 weeks and be over.
No.
No,
that's true. They take a long time, and I was very lucky, that they give me longer contracts, although I had done a lot of research for Nero ahead of time. But I think the difference, you always have to remember that you're writing a novel, and you still have to follow the dictates of drama in a novel, and that is, it's not a history. I used to get annoyed when I would give talks, and people would almost assume that all you do to write a historical novel is put a whole bunch of 4x6 cards together. That it's just a matter of doing research and then you clip them all together. But it's making a lot of dramatic choices, and because you have to have all the things that any pure fiction would have. You've got to have the character arc. You've got to have your character that wants something and can't have it. You've got to have a consistent viewpoint. You've got to build up sympathy for the person. You've got to have suspense so that the people keep turning the pages, even though they know what's going to happen in the end. Right. But there has to be a lot of little suspense things as you go along. And so it really must follow the dictates of creative writing, and if you don't, I think that's why there's so many boring historical novels. I really do. Yeah. I think people get very involved with the history.
Right.
And they're so anxious to tell the history, and they do end up with the 4x6 cards all put together.
Right. Because you have to decide whether they're interesting or not. Like, you can find, especially like with Henry VIII, you're going to have a little bit more to go on, but you're like, I have to tell every detail, and is that interesting enough to put in there? Or
no, and I think that people feel that they want to be there themselves, and they also almost feel like they have to report all that. But I think that it has to move. There has to be conflict. There has to be, they say that the easiest thing. Never assume that your reader's going to be automatically interested in what you're saying. And I think a lot of people feel. I know there are people that say, "Oh, I can't." I can't not finish a book, even if it's boring. But honestly, if I don't like it, I can't go on more than, very long, because it's just, I just doesn't hold my interest. I put it down, and then I just, I keep saying I'll come back to it, but I never do. Whereas you're supposed to make the people want to keep reading, and they say that, imagine the person is holding the thing over a wastebasket, and they'll as soon as they get bored, and you keep that in mind.
Yes. Well, you're an amazing writer. I mean, seriously, and I'm so sorry it took us this long, but I just wanted to be able to have like a great, so I could like show off your writing and be able to, sound like I knew a little bit more about you.
Yes, you wrote it very carefully, and as I said, I've just finished part 2, which takes him like the pregnancy episode, but we've got the Great Fire of Rome, which just starts at the end of that one. Great Fire of Rome, a terrible conspiracy against him, which most people now don't know about, but it was really shocking because it was all his best friends, and no wonder he became suspicious and tetchy and withdrew into art, and then his great Greek artistic rock star tour, and then a very, very melodramatic end of his life.
Yes,
which is actually very well recorded. And Suetonius, like the last 24 hours of his life, reads kind of like a screenplay. They have all these things. It's very, very. You couldn't improve on it, really. So I think that I really missed him. I'm sorry. I finished it about 2 weeks ago, and I'm now fixing it all up, to get it ready to, make it neat and sent off. But I miss him. because I used to spending time with him, and now he's gone.
He's gone.
So
and I was going to ask you that question because I didn't know if you were going to end it, how you were going to end it, and I'm glad that you put this out, and then we get to read the next.
Yeah.
I'm really happy about that. I can't wait to read the next part, actually.
Well,
so you have to let me know.
Year. It'll be out this time next year.
Next year. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I as I said, you get so close to these characters, and then suddenly, you're used to spending your day with them and thinking about them and everything, and then all of a sudden, it's like they're gone, and they're just a fictional character again, or they're way back 2,000 years ago.
Right.
You realize they've been gone 2,000 years, and yet they seem so real because they've been with you. They've been with you, and it's hard to believe they've been gone so long.
Yeah, and you made him real, Margaret. I mean, you made him somebody that we could actually know. And understand more than just watching a documentary. I mean, I'm so happy that I definitely understand way more about that time than I did before. So I'm really grateful for that. And okay, so now you're getting ready to ship that one off. And then what stage, because we need to wrap this up, but I'm like, what stage do you start thinking about the next person? Are you going to give yourself a little break? Or do you already know? I think you take a little break. You have to wait for the person to come to you. As odd as it sounds, the person kind of comes to you, and you kind of have to wait and see who comes, I guess. Now, although Nero, I had wanted to write that book some time ago, and that's why I'd done research on it before, and people were not enthusiastic about Nero because, again, they have this prejudice against him. And they said, I don't know if she can make him likable. Say. That's because they didn't know him, really. They just knew the name. And that was many, many years ago. But that did give me a head start on him. And I never forgot about him. You see, he sometimes you get ideas and then you think, oh, I don't want to do that. But that one just stuck with me. And, it's like I felt very strongly I wanted to tell this story, and I was lucky in a way that I couldn't do it back then because I said these exhibits that have come out since then, and the historians that have been publishing revisionist things, I wouldn't have had those years ago, so it wouldn't have been nearly as good a book. So it was a good thing that I could wait. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'd like to read some of your other books and talk to you about them. I mean, okay, anytime. You can think about it, but I love your writing style. And as I was going through this list when I was preparing, I was like, I want to read these. I want to know about these people because I don't know enough, and I love your writing style. So anyway, for everybody, I'm going to show this again because it's a beautiful, beautiful cover. There you go. It is. And if you think you know Nero, you need to read. Because you don't know the real Nero. And, it's a great book. Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you. Okay. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon, okay? Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.